Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining this webinar on a Friday. On a quite of a important topic. So I hope you will have a good weekend after this, or a reason to have a good weekend. We have an impressive lineup of speakers joining us today, and I am so privileged to moderate this discussion with our colleagues. We have Bojana Zoric, Dr. Zoric, joining us. Thank you, Bojana. Dr. Jelena Jankic, thank you, Jelena. Dr. Odeta Barbolushi, and my dear friend from Belgrade, Stefan Vladisavljev, or as we call it in our circle, the China guy. Not that he is in favor, but I think you can't find anyone who has published more on China, I guess, in our region than Stefan. And Stefan will cover this issue in our discussion. We are also joined by my dear friend from Tirana, Claudian Seferai, from Open Society Foundations, who have made this possible. This is part of the IGNITA initiative, which is a regional coalition of civil society working on promoting cooperation and greater relations between our region and EU. But Claudia will talk more about that. As for our publication, I will share now in the chat for other colleagues attending the link to the publication. So you can also follow, and perhaps as our colleagues will make the presentations, you can even find what they wrote in the report and see if you have any questions or clarifications, or even if you want to challenge us, I guess, on what we have wrote. But before we move to our discussion, I want to use the opportunity to invite Claude for his also opening remarks. And Claude can also talk more about IGNITA, the project we are running, but and cooperation, but also from the very perspective of civil society in terms of the regional cooperation. So Claude, the digital floor is yours.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to you for organizing this, but especially to the Kosovar Centre for Security Studies. For us, it is understandable that speaking of building a shared security architecture in the Western Balkans may sound like utopia. However, that doesn't make the threat we face any smaller. Threats don't come as fragmented as we are in the region. We are navigating a region where the threats are hybrid, the actors are asymmetric, and the coordination is still fragmented. What this project, Ascent Western Balkans seeks make visible and what we have embarked upon as partner of IGNITA initiative is a different pathway, one that treats regional security cooperation and integration not as a technical ambition but as a structural necessity. This of course matters for the region first and foremost, but also we are going to discuss how it matters for the European Union, because the test is not whether the Western Balkans can align with EU frameworks, the test is whether the EU can also meaningfully integrate a region that is already operating at the edge of its institutional perimeter. And this is the message we need to send to Brussels and everywhere to the EU member states' capitals. For us at Open Society Foundation, this project is a success story, and I don't say this just because our dear friend Dan is here and our dear colleagues from KCSS, but for us this is a demonstration of what important advocacy work looks like when it is sustained, regionally embedded and focused on long-term vision. The project, as you are going to see, does not stop at producing only analysis and research. It generates traction and engages directly with key individuals in public institutions across the Western Balkans and the European Union, who are responsible for implementing the requested reforms. It brings to light the role civil society can play in shaping the future and governance, and what is also very important for us, regional security. That's why we have seen this project as a strategic contribution. It can build credibility not only in the region, but also with EU actors. As Danny was starting to mention, this is the great and persistent work that this project is trying to do. And its aim, what Danny and the other colleagues can say more, is how the Western Balkans 6 can be part of the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, as we call it, ENISA. And we are trying to include the Western Balkans in an observer role. But this is not only a symbolic status. We see it very much as a meaningful and concrete step towards gradual institutional integration, the kind that does not wait for formal enlargement to start building shared responsibilities and inclusion. Reaping the benefits of integration means also starting to truly adapt to EU institutional frameworks. We need to build capacities, we need to learn how these mechanisms function from the inside, and we need to build and contribute to regional intelligence to European policy domains. ENISA is a case that we need to build upon and learn it and promote it as a model. Observer status means a lot of things, and Dani can tell more about this. But I think we all agree that early access to these EU initiatives, frameworks, and working methods and standards, it can be beneficial to all the citizens of Western Balkans. We have created, as Dani mentioned, the NITA initiative because we saw the need for continuity and following up on our own initiative for regional agency, which is very important for us and Open Society Foundation Western Balkans, for strategic investments in spaces and partnerships that are too often episodic. IGNITA allows us to support work that is not isolated by sector of time frame. We are investing in security, rule of law, governance, digital transformation, and these are not parallel tracks, and the value of IGNITA is precisely in its capacity to link what is often disconnected and to keep policy advocacy aligned with regional knowledge and agency. I would like to thank you, especially the panel of experts, for their kind contribution, and I look forward, Dani, to hearing the discussion.
Thank you, Claude, so much for your opening remarks. As Claude mentioned, the report that we are publishing today in this discussion is the third report in the framework of the SEND project that is supported by Open Society Foundation's Western Balkans. And this report on regional security cooperation that we are launching today comes after a report we did on how we can advance, as Claude mentioned, cybersecurity integration of the region in the EU, looking at options for having the Balkans become part of ENISA. And then also we looked at the annual rule of law report of the European Commission and how it would be we basically presented arguments in favor of including everyone everyone in the region in this report as means to increase accountability and rule of law. This draws in the work in 2023 we did with Civil Society Forum of the Berlin Process, where Stefan was part of the core group of experts where we did consultations on geopolitics and security. And these issues came up as issues of common interest for the entire region. And at the time, thanks to data, I might add, some of the things and recommendations from this working group made it to the leaders' conclusions, and they were adopted or welcomed or endorsed in a way, and this is giving us a very strong ground to push forward for some of these issues. Now, having said this introductory part, I am very happy to invite our first expert to speak on the institutional and governmental approaches to regional security cooperation, Dr. Bojana Zoric. Bojana, the digital floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dani and Claudia, and a pleasure to be here today and work on this topic together with colleagues. As you mentioned, all of us looked at regional security cooperation, but from different angles. And my part was to analyze the institutional and governmental approaches to understand how security cooperation in the region plays out and what it actually entails. But before digging deeper, what we also need to be aware of, and this has been a cross-cutting theme throughout its chapters, is, of course, evolving European context that directly impacts the region. Russia's full-scale invasion of the Ukraine marked a turning point not only for European security, but also for the EU's approach to enlargement. And what was once a process largely focused on the consolidation of democratic values and economic convergence has now become also a matter of strategic security. And having said that, the war exposed vulnerabilities along the EU's eastern but also southeastern borders in the Western Balkans. And in response, we saw that the EU fast-tracked the candidacies of Ukraine and Moldova, but it also prompted a broader reassessment of the role the Western Balkans play in Europe's collective resilience. And somehow this shift in thinking was clearly visible, for instance, at February 2025 ministerial meeting in Rome, where HRVP Kaja Kallas referred to the shared security perspective as central to future enlargement, while Commissioner Koss also underlined the need for gradual integration in exchange for delivery on reforms. And this is especially important in the realm of security. And what I also wanted to point out is that this shift is not limited to institutional Brussels, to institutions only. Because if you look at the latest Eurobarometer, you'll see that 66% of EU citizens now believe the Union should play a stronger role in protecting Europeans from global security threats. And this growing consensus suggests that the question is no longer when the Western Balkans will join the EU, but rather how they can become meaningful contributors to the EU's evolving security architecture. And this is precisely where the regional security cooperation from an institutional angle comes in. As a matter of fact, while looking at different aspects of institutional regional security cooperation, I've realized that institutions in the region, in cooperation with European and international ones, are actually delivering results. If you look at the major security initiatives, you'll see that the Western Balkans are contributing. And here I'm talking about, for instance, CEPOL, Europol, Eurojust, ADA, Frontex, PCC, SEE, Interpol, CELAC, even United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, but many others. And to be more concrete, I've taken a look at Europol. And there you can see that the institution has played a key role in fostering operational collaboration between the neighbors in the Western Balkans. First and foremost, all 6 Western Balkans partners are actively engaged, with Serbia taking a particularly active role. And this coordination within Europol is secured through the Secure Information Exchange Network application, which basically, as the name says, enables the safe exchange of sensitive information within this network and closed group of countries that are contributing. And if we speak numbers, then between 2023 and March 2025 this year, there have been 21 joint Europol operations with the participation of Western Balkans. These operations concerned smuggling of drugs, arms, humans, medicine, even clothes. And here we are talking about massive operations and massive resources and arrests and confiscation of all above mentioned illegal goods worth millions of euros. And there are also good examples of joint operations where all 6 Western Balkans participated. These are 4 operations out of 21, and while in others, only a few partners contributed, but still. Then you, for instance, have EU Drugs Agency, EUDA. In 2023, they released their IPA8 project that involves 6 beneficiaries in the region. And through it, EUDA released its first Western Balkans drug data sheet in December 2024. And it is actually a milestone that is preparing the region for future engagement with the EU Drugs Agency, once, of course, the beneficiaries become observers, but also full-fledged participants. Then, of course, you have other institutionalized initiatives, such as the Western Balkans Partnership Against Crime and Terrorism. This is as well implemented with Europol. It runs until 2028, and it also boosts training, intelligence sharing between the candidate countries, potential candidate countries, and the EU member states, but also it ensures regional coordination and, of course, cooperation. Then in the field of arms control, there is the roadmap for a sustainable solution to arms control in the Western Balkans. It's backed by France, Germany, and the EU. And when it was adopted, it was a pivotal success because it now feeds into the EU action plan on firearms trafficking. And the real achievement lies with this actually in the growing cross-border cooperation within the criminal justice sector, where intelligence and evidence-led operations are becoming the standard. And this is actually the direction that the region should continue to pursue, and ground breakings are already here. And I have to say that these are not symbolic actions if you really look at it deeper, because they show that when the Western Balkans are integrated into the structured EU-led mechanisms, the outcomes are measurable and strategic, and automatically they actually increase the level of cooperation. So having said that, I also looked at some obstacles, because still the cooperation remains uneven within the region. And some of the persistent roadblocks identified will also be mentioned by my colleagues, as you'll hear further, because actually these challenges are repeating across domains and they have become a systemic issue. What I've seen as particularly challenging when looking at these governmental and institutional approaches, these are first and foremost political interference, which remains a major issue because security institutions, including police and judicial bodies, are often subjected to undue political pressures, which is especially seen in high-profile investigations or appointments. And this automatically erodes their credibility and effectiveness with the citizens. And then we have elephant in the room, of course, unresolved disputes, which severely limit cooperation, and they bring cooperation within some countries more than with other countries. And this is an issue that has been here for a long time. Then mentioning civil society organizations that Claudia as well pointed out, there is very limited inclusion of civil society organizations in these kinds of security initiatives, which weakens the entire oversight. And in post-conflict settings, such as the Western Balkans, actually it is essential that the CSOs are involved, and not only for transparency and accountability, but also to support these reconciliation efforts at the community or grassroots level. Another challenge that is persistent is resource constraints. This is a major hurdle because many agencies in the region lack digital tools and infrastructure, and this affects everything from cross-border cooperation with Frontex to migrant, for instance, processing, where outdated systems delay identification and referral procedures in line with the EU standards. And finally, again, an overarching theme is corruption, which remains a systemic problem. And if you look at the citizens' perception, you'll see that over 55% of citizens in the Western Balkans distrust judicial institutions. And this is a dramatic increase from just 25% a decade ago. And without public trust, even the best designed security frameworks will struggle to gain traction on the ground. But however, I will not finish on a negative note because indeed there are plenty of positive moments identified in our joint work on this paper. And what I argue is actually that the EU needs to go further, because while these challenges are serious, they're also not insurmountable. And more importantly, they're not a reason to disengage. EU-led initiatives have already proven that with access, structure, and support, the Western Balkans could be a net contributor to European stability. But as long as they remain outside key EU structures, including ENISA or other agencies, collective defense will remain incomplete. And amidst these geopolitical changes, European but also global ones, this fragmented approach is no longer viable. So gradual integration into EU agencies would not only help secure the Western Balkans, but it would also reinforce security across the European Union and across its EU southern flank. And this is the narrative that we should be pursuing in the times to come. That's all from me for now, Danny. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bojana, for your presentation and the points you made. And if you look at our report, Bojana has done a very, I would say, probably a difficult job of identifying some of the operations where we participated as the region and also the initiatives, so mapping them out. But I think the key point that I'm taking from Bojana is that it is common sense to bring Western Balkans in the EU regional security cooperation. And it is important both for EU security and our own, in a way, performance, as our articles say. Greater regional security cooperation is also important for rule of law and democracy. Now we move on to this. Bojana mentioned European Union and European integration process. So next is our colleague, Dr. Jelena Jankic. Jelena, the digital floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Danny, and thank you above all for inviting me to contribute to the IGNITA project that's run by KCSS with the support of OSI. And I think what you have done, and also Bojana's introductory speech, they show the significance, if you wish, of security matters in the context of EU integration, and not only in the context of EU integration as we understand it as EU enlargement, but also more broadly, the importance of security cooperation for, let's say, if you wish, a common European future, for the future of Europe, for the future of the European Union. Now, thinking about our small world, if you wish, of the Western Balkans, we think about regional security cooperation mostly in the context of EU enlargement. And this is a dynamic, Bojana has said this, and I think we've probably grown a little bit even tired of this repetitive stream of how the European enlargement process has been given a push following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Yes, this has been a fact, but it's also been a fact that security, again, repeating what Bojana has said, has become integral to the the Western Balkan region has become central to the European security architecture precisely through this connection to EU enlargement. So what does this essentially mean? What I've tried to do in my short contribution is to perhaps think about security a bit more broadly and in a bit more holistic way. So please bear with me. And there I made an analogy with the Roman god Janus, the god with two heads, one looking to the outside and the other head looking to the inside. And this is perhaps the way in which I, as a scholar, perceive security questions. Those that are related to the outside, if you wish, security, so threats from the outside, which refer obviously to questions related to territory, questions related to borders, or if you wish, the physical survival of states. But equally important is the internal security dimension, which is the security of, if you wish, individuals, security of institutions, security of values, security of society, and security of democracy as a concept. And I think we can see various levels of challenges to both of those, not only in the Western Balkan region, but also more broad. And if we think about this internal, or if you wish, softer dimension of security, we often overlook it compared to the hard military threats. And I think to the ways in which today's contemporary world and geopolitics function has decentered security questions from individuals and in a way pushed them to these hard security matters. Now, what I try and argue in this paper is that with the renewed focus on enlargement, looking at both of these dimensions in a holistic way, so taking into account the importance of the Western Balkan states in collaborating in terms of securing their borders, fighting against organized crime, establishing police collaboration, fighting cyber threats is as important as is educating their citizens to actively, if you wish, to be empowered to act as, in a way, watchdogs on institutions, on political life of their countries, but also having the power to, if you wish, untangle misinformation from real facts. And I think that this is something that can eventually represent an important pillar of society for the Western Balkans. Now, bear with me for a second. The kinds of security challenges that these countries face are, as we know, both related to those that come from within our societies. And these internal challenges obviously require a regional approach. But as internal challenges to the Western Balkan states are diverse, we can see different, if you wish, strength or different desire to essentially establish regional collaboration in different domains. Now, one of the key challenges to pretty much all the Western Balkan states is mitigating ethnopolitical tensions and conflict potential. And I think we can see this most clearly nowadays with the situation in North Kosovo since 2022, the recent tensions in Bosnia and Herzegovina, etc., etc. Now, I think that pretty much everyone in this digital room, if you wish, is aware of how beneficial would regional collaboration be in addressing these matters. However, it's perhaps the one that's the most difficult to achieve, right? So because of the obvious reasons and the obvious lines of division amongst the different countries. And we have seen the responses to the military alliance that Albania, Croatia, and Kosovo had put forward. So this has not been, in a way, praised throughout the region. Now, the second dimension of internal challenges is related to the institutional shortcomings in the Western Balkans. And here we can actually see through the process of EU integration that there has been a push for the countries in the region to collaborate in the matters related to the rule of law. So there have been initiatives in the context of justice and home affairs related to police collaboration, mutual legal aid, questions of extradition, drug trafficking, organized crime. And these are all essential to, in a way, creating secure societies across the region. Now, I think that the third dimension is the one that perhaps has the greatest potential for creating meaningful collaboration amongst the region's countries. And that's the challenge of the weak democratic capacity and disengaged citizens. Now, this is commonly not something that we hear in the European integration discourse, because societal apathy is normally not considered a challenge in the context of security. But if you think about it, it essentially is. It is one of the key security challenges to the state that come from within. Because if you think about an apathic citizen compared to an informed and empowered citizen, the second one is the lifeblood of democracy, because they can hold their governments accountable. Holding governments accountable in turn prevents corruption and organized crimes. Such empowered and informed citizens cannot be manipulated, and this in turn reduces their susceptibility to misinformation, to fake news, etc., etc. And this is the area where there essentially is and should be massive potential for regional cooperation. So I think that this is something where also, Dani, speaking to you directly here, civil society organizations can and should make an important push that can then feed into different areas of collaboration. Now, the same when it comes to the external security challenges, right? If you think about the hard versus soft threats that societies encounter, the hard ones meaning military threats or threat of attack or invasion, establishing lines of cooperation among the Western Balkan states, save for except for, if you wish, their participation in various EU agencies, which is something that Buena has touched upon, and also I think Claude during his introductory speech, is a little bit more difficult, and especially regarding the contentious question of NATO membership in certain countries in the region, right? So I think this is something that will need to be addressed at a certain point. But at the same time, there has been significant collaboration among the region's countries in the context of, if you wish, soft security challenges. And we've seen this in the context of cross-border collaboration, civil society initiatives, but also in terms of establishing initiatives to counter cybersecurity threats. And here I'm referring to the Franco-Slovenian initiative to establish the Western Balkans Cyber Capacity Center in Montenegro, which is in a way an initiative that leads to further regional collaboration. Now, here I guess I've thrown out a lot of things in a single presentation, but what I'm trying to say and how I would bring this together is by saying that regional cooperation in security matters is crucial. And when we speak about it, and I hope that I've achieved the same, we should not forget that the Western Balkan countries, regardless of what the local politicians say, they are small states, and they are states with very limited capacity. And I think this is something we should never forget. And I think it's important to build cooperation over time, focusing perhaps as much on, let's say, defense cooperation and collaboration in the domain of justice and home affairs, as well as on those, if you wish, soft matters that are centered on human security. Because essentially building the capacity of individuals to create and live in secure societies is an investment in security in the future. And I'll leave it at this and happy to address any questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena, for your remarks. It reminded me, as you were talking about, again, building on Boyana's point of how the region should be seen as an added value to EU security architecture. And I'm reminded of this perception in EU when it comes to security, that they see us as periphery. And I think I made also the mistake of using this concept in my synthesis part in our paper. And for instance, I find an issue when you go to Brussels or you're talking to you and they say, when we had the issue of migration or even organized crime, that they use the word Balkan route. And, you know, I don't think there is a way you can enter Balkan without entering EU first. So I don't see it how that can happen. So it could be EU-Balkan EU route, but there cannot be a Balkan route without, first of all, entering EU. So, and I think our next speaker, Dr. Odeta Barbulushi, who worked directly on these issues, bringing the region closer, supporting cooperation, and now is with College of Europe in Tirana, can perhaps even shed light on also these issues of perception. But Odeta's approach and intervention will be on initiatives to support regional cooperation, like the Berlin process, which has done, I think, which has made some important, I would say, or has some important results in this direction from the London 2018 Right Summit and so forth. But without further ado, I want to invite Odeta to make her remarks as well on this issue. Odeta.
Thank you, Dani, and good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be part of this discussion with esteemed colleagues, in fact, who have worked for so long on security issues. And thank you to Kosovo Centre for Security Studies and OSF for the support of this platform and research conducted on regional security cooperation. I would start, in fact, from the outset with a positive evaluation or assessment. And I would say that this collaboration among experts, academia, and think tanks in the area of security is, in fact, one of the deliverables of regional security cooperation. And it's, in fact, one of the significant contributions to or towards creating a security community in the Western Balkans. And I think that is a very important, meaningful contribution of regional security cooperation as part of Berlin process, but in fact not only. And I think that is important to emphasize. The second, I would say, deliverable or positive contribution of regional security cooperation in the framework of institutionalized initiatives, broadly speaking, but most particularly in the framework of Berlin process, is in fact preparing the countries and paving the way for closer integration of the region into European security mechanisms and instruments, something which was very eloquently presented here by our two previous colleagues, Bojana and Jelena. And in fact, the European context is instrumental, is very important, is key to our discussion of regional security cooperation, but also more broadly of regional cooperation. As we are now, since 2022, what we are seeing is a new momentum of, in fact, acceleration of EU accession perspective of the countries in the region. What we see is a new awareness on the part of the EU that with the region, work cannot continue business as usual. And this has been, in fact, mirrored and reflected with the opening of negotiations formally with Albania and North Macedonia, granting the candidate status to Bosnia, and I'm speaking specifically about the region, not Eastern Partnership countries. And with Albania, the acceleration started, I would say, from last October with the opening of the first cluster on fundamentals and so on. So if I may summarize, in fact, this moment is that if we have, for the past, I would say, decade, we have focused energies on regional cooperation, not just as a precondition, as a, how to say, stepping stone towards EU integration, but as the main project that we could work on in the region in the moment that EU accession was somehow dormant and not really moving forward. Now we have rather sort of the opposite process of actually we have an acceleration of EU integration process. And the question is, what we'll do with the agenda of regional cooperation now that the countries are moving bilaterally quite fast? Do we still need and what we can build on? So I think in this context, the discussion today is quite relevant, and particularly focusing on what we can take on and build upon in terms of deliverables and results of regional cooperation in the security front. Now, let me start by saying that, in fact, security cooperation as a thematic pillar was never part of the Berlin process, or from the very beginning, so to speak, in the same way that the political cooperation with regard to EU accession and reforms in the EU agenda was, and economic growth and economic convergence, or people-to-people context was as a thematic pillar or as an instrument towards reconciliation. And that, of course, for obvious reasons, I think Jelena made that distinction between sort of soft and hard security matters or external and internal. The focus was primarily on those security areas related to domestic reforms, primarily related to resilience of the institutions. And as far as people-to-people contexts were concerned, that was seen as a sort of indirect instrument for post-conflict reconciliation. That has been a dominating paradigm, I would say, since 1999 in this region as part of Stability Pact and other previous initiatives. Now, the hard security matters sort of were pushed into the agenda by developments on the ground. We had, I think it was mentioned here, it was migration since 2015, primarily, more notably the crisis that led to the emergence of the so-called, you mentioned, Dani, the Balkan route, but also the terrorist attacks in Paris in 2015, in fact, which led to greater efforts, on the part of the Balkans, of the region, to cooperate in the front of countering violent extremism and terrorism and radicalization. And what we also see, and I think this is one of the points I make and I underline in my piece in our joint publication, is that these issues were pushed into the agenda of regional cooperation primarily through EU or particular EU member states. And of course, there is a positive and maybe not as positive aspect into that. Of course, the positive aspect, something I have underlined, is that by having particular EU member states more invested in regional security in the Western Balkans, we also see a political plus, a political advantage of that, of having EU member states also more invested and contributing towards preparedness of this country to cooperate more in the security front, and towards preparedness of these countries to integrate more in European security mechanisms and instruments. And already some examples were brought up here, like France, Italy, Germany itself as the country which launched the Berlin process, and also what we see from 2018 onwards, when in fact that was the summit when we have the first ministerial of ministers of interior convened under the chairmanship or during the chairmanship of the United Kingdom. What we also see is countries like the UK in a way emphasizing or underlining the importance of regional security cooperation in the Western Balkans as part of their own repositioning and or reframing their position vis-a-vis European security. So I think these are important aspects to take on board as we look at how the agenda of security cooperation evolved and what we have now that we can build on. As we have seen, particularly since 2018 onwards, we have the creation of a number of instruments and platforms, which I think have led to improvement of cooperation on a number of fronts. Particularly here, some of the fronts that were mentioned by Bojana were of joint border and patrol controls, or the integrated border management with regards to sharing of information and also exchange of practices from one country to the other, or one party of the other in the Western Balkans, as well as a number of joint initiatives in the area of rule of law and anti-corruption, which in addition to, I would say, socialization of public administrations and experts of the area, have also led to a sort of a positive pressure of competition among the public administration in the countries of the Western Balkans, and shared practices among them. I don't want to repeat what was already said, Dani, with regard to some of the key deliverables. Here we mentioned the roadmap for the management of small and light or sustainable solution to arms control in the Western Balkans, that was made part of the EU roadmap on light and small weapons. But we also mentioned here cooperation in the framework for Europol and other mechanisms. And I think one point that I would like to underline, and here I echo my colleague's point, is that as far as cooperation, information sharing and trust among the countries of the Western Balkans, we see a higher level of all of the above when we have seen EU-led coordination, or where we have seen cooperation in the framework of EU mechanisms and instruments, rather than when we have regional cooperation only as regional platforms separate, or forged only in the context of regional initiatives apart from EU-led mechanisms. And this is an important point to make. When it comes to a variety of other areas, including here, let's say, areas of cooperation which have evolved in response to, let's say, cyber attacks in Albania and Montenegro in 2022, so namely cooperation in cybersecurity, but also in other areas like countering violent extremism and so on. One that comes up as a sort of a structural systemic hindrance or obstacle is again entrenched mistrust among the administration and experts of Western Balkan 6. So this is something which I think was mentioned before and still remains. Trust is higher when cooperation is part of EU-led mechanisms and instruments and platforms. The second, I would say, and I think I jump now into the limitations rather than positive deliverables, because it's difficult to discuss one without the other, is in fact different understandings of security. And this does not have to do only with the expert, or in fact doesn't have to do exclusively with experts community or public administrations and civil servants, but is first and foremost a systemic feature related to a political will and related to a different outlook on security and foreign policy. To use maybe a term of security slang, it has to do with very different threat assessments from one country to the other in the Balkans. So that, I think, feeds into the mistrust, but also give a sort of a broader context to what we see as more, technical hindrances and obstacles to cooperation in the security sector. I think the other limitations that come across, and I have seen in my previous capacity in policy, but also were mentioned here, are limited capacities, yes, limited resources. But I would also add to this limited know-how, and particularly when it comes to further integration and embeddedness in EU mechanisms and in EU instruments of security cooperation. And this is maybe one of the areas that more work can be done, not jointly only, but also in cooperation with the EU. Another feature that I think it's important to mention, again in relation to security cooperation, is very different legislation and regulatory frameworks. I think this was mentioned across different contributions in our publication. In the context of Berlin process, but also in the context of more specific initiatives within Berlin process, like common regional market, work has been done with regards to, or in the direction with a view to align regulatory frameworks more, particularly when it comes, let's say, to foreign direct investments, corruptive and practices and good governance, particularly when it comes to border management, cross-border cooperation, and so on. But I think here I echo previous colleagues' statements that this is still limited or uneven, rather. And I think more work can be done towards that as these countries progress towards the EU, and also in the context of more enhanced cooperation of these countries with particular EU member states in the area of customs cooperation and so on. Particularly now, if we think of the extension of the green lanes with the surrounding EU member states, I think that's anti-corruption and good governance should be, I think, a fundamental part of the cooperation agenda and of this particular initiative. When I think we speak again of the broader political aspects, I think some were mentioned here. I already mentioned mistrust, or I already mentioned different readings and an assessment of threats and of security. I won't go into bilateral relations because I think this was a theme already touched upon, and it is one of the hindrances, not just for security cooperation, but for regional agenda in general. And we have seen how the role that bilateral relations have played to delaying not just commitments, but first and foremost implementation of commitments already taken by member states. But I will maybe elaborate a bit more on the current context of geopolitical competition. I think Stefan will take up from that and speak a bit more about the role of third countries and powers. What we have seen, I think, since 2022, we have two rather opposite developments done, if I may elaborate. One is, in fact, what I started with at the beginning of my intervention is that you have an awareness on the part of the EU that we need to work closer with the Western Balkans, and here the evolution of EU perspective and EU policies is very important. I mean, I discussed 2015, 2016 in terms of security cooperation agenda. And that also, what I forgot to mention was that it was not just migration and terrorism on the ground. It was also the fact that there was an evolution since then of the EU's approach towards the Balkans with the EU's global strategy, where resilience, not within the EU, but also in the countries around, and closer cooperation with partners was mentioned for the first time. What we see now since 2022, we have a greater degree of that awareness, and we have actual steps taken in that direction. Both Albania and North Macedonia have now European security and defense partnerships signed with the EU. And I think that needs to be extended onto other countries in the region. But the opposite development is that the region is mirroring also broader geopolitical competition. And I think something of that was mentioned here. What we see is, and we may see that in the future, is a proliferation of bilateral or trilateral cooperation and initiatives in the area of security and defense. We have the signing, I understand, of it's a roadmap or agreement in implementation of a previous agreement of 2 years ago signed between Serbia and Hungary. And this was signed just 10 days after the the joint statement on cooperation in the area of security between Albania, Croatia, and Kosovo. Now, all these steps, if they are taken separately, I think may have a relative relevance, because initiatives like this have existed for the past 10 years or more. These countries have bilateral, trilateral agreements with other EU member states in the area of security. But I think in the current context, they gain greater relevance. And they may also lead, I think, to a greater sense of and mood, I would say, of securitization in the region when it comes to defense, when it comes to this area of a fear of politics, what you call, Dani, in your introduction of our publication, politics of blocks rather than deeper cooperation in the security front. And I think this is something we need to be aware of. And this is where the contribution of our security community, albeit virtual or not, is, I think, very important to build bridges and to balance where we see that there is also in the public sphere a sense of anxiety for some countries grouping together as opposed to other countries in the region. In addition to that, I would mention a last point, as I think part of the discussion of what we can do to address limitations, is we need to see more proactive agenda setting on the part of the Western Balkans. We have indeed seen a more proactive approach on the part of the Western Balkans from 2022 onward. I would say, without any sense of modesty, the discussion, and I know in the audience we have colleagues from External Service and from EU Commission, but this is, I think, is important to mention. For example, with regard to instruments like the growth plan, that request came from the region. The growth plan as an instrument was a response to the region's claims, as were many other claims coming from the region that, and as we see here now, that the region must be part, what Claudia mentioned, as part of, let's say, digital program, fully fledged member, or of cyber security frameworks and the agency, the European Agency on Cybersecurity, or in fact, there are a number of more recent proposals, let's say, of the countries becoming part of European Intervention Initiative, and so on and so forth. These are, in fact, initiatives, claims, and demands coming from the region. And I think this must continue, the region working more together to be more proactive. But also, I think on issues like migration, for example, the countries must make the point that any discussion on migration without a counter discussion on competitiveness, growth, innovation, and human capital in the region is self-defeating. So, and I say that also as we have an upcoming UK chairmanship of Berlin process, and I look forward to see what the priorities will be there. But we need to counter these sort of issues of security agenda, which have a sort of more negative or threat association to a positive agenda of security, providing solutions, providing a more sort of forthcoming vision for the region. And a very last point, what I would ask for is more, or what I think is important is more policy continuity from initiatives like Berlin Process to, let's say, broader European initiatives like European Political Community to EU Western Balkan summits. And that continuity has not quite been there in previous years. And I think it's very important for the countries of the region to underline, I think it's in connection to the second point I made with regard to proactiveness of what is important to them, not only what's important in response to the EU and response to EU member states, but what is important to them as a region, and as a region which aspires to be part of the EU, to bring on the table and to integrate into the European agenda. Because to underline what other colleagues said, yes, security cooperation in the region and in the EU is not just a priority for the region, but first and foremost is instrumental, is key to European security and agency. So I'll leave it there, and I look forward to comments or questions we may have from online audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Odeta, for your remarks. And I think all of us remember in London 2018, there was even an agreement on creating the Berlin Process Western Balkans security steering group, right? And there was an agreement on exchange of information. But trust that you mentioned is quite important. And I think in 2023, that's why the agreement on visa potentially failed, right? Where we would have agreed that, you know, anyone having a visa from any of the Western Balkan 6 countries could have entered in the other. Which is weird to me, because at the same time we talk about being part of EU and Schengen and all of this, where you will have to do this stuff. But I think trust is important. Just recently, Kosovo and North Macedonia opened this one-stop concept at the border crossing, and I think it was quite difficult to get this done, partly because of trust, you know, sharing this information on who is on your stop list and all of this stuff is and security institutions tend to be more skeptical of each other than, I guess, us, civil society or academia, how we see it, the cooperation. But I like that the point of trust that you brought, and I think it's a major stumbling block. Now we conclude our remarks with Stefan, who is going to discuss malign foreign influence with us, tying all of this together and reminding us why all of this matters. So, Stefan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Dani. Thanks to KCSS and to OSF-Western Balkans, of course, for arranging all of this. I have to say that following these 3 interventions is really an honor, because what is left for me to do is just say everything that is wrong with what we are talking about, and all of the challenges and deficiencies that we have after hope that was given to us, that the regional cooperation will actually function and that we have some potential for security arrangements within the region. But joking aside, definitely looking at malign influences is actually doing that. Looking at malign influences is actually showcasing what are the deficiencies of regional security cooperation. But in that context, everything that was said before should be seen as a roadmap on how to mitigate those negative aspects and those deficiencies and create more resilient societies, more resilient systems, and I would dare to say more resilient regional networks in order to facilitate what has been a main goal, and that is the democratic regimes with the respect of the rule of law and systematic approach towards democratic processes, with the end goal of joining European Union. All of that said, looking at malign influences cannot be looked at with one template, because either they are very different in their core with the longevity and approaches that they are deploying, or they act with different interests within the region. And Western Balkan region has always been a fruitful ground for even clashes between great powers and also regional powers, with different actors within the region, with closer connections to specific actors. So looking into what others have been doing within our region is nothing new for us. But how to respond to that has been something that we are still figuring out how to do. Definitely, when we look at actors like Russia and China, but not only them, also Turkey, some other countries, we have seen a certain and identified a certain end goals of their presence here. I'm definitely, I will definitely be identifying some of the specific areas where the presence has been more visible than the other. But what I want to highlight and what I want to underline is that although we have seen specific cases in specific countries, doesn't mean that that is not something translatable to other actors in the region, and that other actors in the region should not see it as a cautionary tales or potentially way how to prevent certain negative aspects being spilled over to their specific systems within the Western Balkan region. That said, sectors, strategically important sectors like energy sector, infrastructure, digital infrastructure as well, security, have been exposed to certain missteps in cooperation with actors from abroad. Most notably in the energy sector, the high level of dependency on Russia when it comes to the Russian gas and oil has been exposed as a certain vulnerability following the outbreak of the Ukrainian war or the Russian aggression in Ukraine. But it is also something that has showcased that we should not seek diversification for the end goal of changing one dependency to another one, and that we should look into more coordinated approach what the standards will and should be when it comes to diversification, because what the region lacks is autonomous ownership of the energy sources, and that is something that through different initiatives, including the ones that have been promoted by actors present in the room here, with the support again with the Open Society Foundation Western Balkans, like inclusion in the European Union emission trading system, down the road can be potentially seen as mitigation efforts or prevention efforts to dependencies on the outside actors. When it comes to the infrastructural cooperation with external actors, cautionary tale from Montenegro in 2021 on how something that looks great in a form of cheap loans, long-term grace periods, and long-term repayment tranches can actually come back and bite you in certain parts of your body with aggressive interest rates, and the fact that when the tranche is due to be repaid, you need to repay it, and there is no much room for negotiation of different aspects. I'm leveraging this as a way of showcasing the economic presence of China in the region, where cautionary tale does come from Montenegro, but the leverage of Chinese presence comes from Serbia mostly, with China becoming #1 foreign direct investor when it comes to the specific countries. So still not comparable to the EU 27, but more than any individual EU 27 country. And when it comes to the long-term presence through infrastructural projects and loans that have been placed in the region as well. Not to limit it to economic presence and not to limit to the question of economic security, questions of disinformation, issues of disinformation, issues of soft power campaigns, especially have been identified especially as the ones that are not recognizing borders within the region, and therefore are very, very potent tool for the, let's say, positioning of the foreign actors if there is no response that is relevant to the means and tools deployed by the actors like China and Russia. What I would actually like to highlight has been mentioned and has been talked, but this is also a very important part of my paper, and that is the role of civil society in creating, let's say, tools for more resilient societies towards the negative aspects of the foreign influences. Because it is very hard to describe any country, including Russia and China, as solely negative in solely negative terms. There are a lot or a decent amount of things coming as a positive result of cooperation with Russia and China, but definitely cautiousness is pre-required when you cooperate with them. And a lot of reasons why is because the governments are showing, the domestic governments are showing deficiencies when it comes to the transparency, accountability, something that has been discussed intensively in the previous interventions. So I want to highlight the role of civil society in all this. Many of us here are parts of the different networks, and this is a thing that I'm underlying is something that needs to be continued and needs to be done. It is something that has provided a region a more unified approach towards issues and topics where the governments could not find a common language and could not find a common ground to work from. But civil society organizations also require a lot of support from both internal and external actors. So far, the push coming from the EU, but also US, has been of a great value when it comes to the examination of malign aspects of the foreign influences. With the changes in the US approach towards USG approach towards these issues, I think that now we need to take more regional ownership, and this is something that needs to come with the support of the actors like European Union, but also within the framework of cooperation like Berlin process. It is something that has been already set as a framework where these topics can be put forefront, and we can actually cooperate on that with existing tools. So it doesn't even require additional investment in building additional capacity, just utilization of the existing ones. And unfortunately, we have a lot of things to do before we reach the required level of cooperation, because in certain areas we lack capacity. We lack capacity of understanding the core mechanisms being deployed in the region, or we need additional capacities in building networks in order to have more coordinated approach. I'm mentioning this because a lot of resources have been pulled into policy impact, and because we are talking about influences in countries which have very close cooperation with the governments, because if they don't, they would not have as many successes in deploying their tools of interest in the region. They will not be as successful as they are. So if you want to have a policy impact, that pretty much often means that you are going against your own governments. And currently, in certain areas, geographical areas within the region, civil society, organization, and governments are not really on good terms. being described as foreign agents, having media campaigns against them. Basically, in a position where we are back in some earlier parts of our democratic development. But what has been a relief has been a regional support from colleagues, partners, and regional approach towards this is a way how we should continue, I truly believe, down the road. And what we want to achieve a situation in which civil society organizations are not seen as enemies or opponents and are seen as a extended hand of the governments, extended hand of the governing that is surpassing sole institutions, because there is a capacity that can be further developed. There are established frameworks and networks that can be utilized in order to work on the issues of regional cooperation and how to create more resilient mechanisms and how to mitigate the existing negative aspects of the foreign influences. And finally, with the coherent approach that would include a proactive approach of the government towards the regional cooperation in these issues, but also active role of the civil society, a basis for the further discussion on how we can integrate in all of the mechanisms mentioned above by my great colleagues, and also in the broader sense, how to facilitate further the European integration process. I will stop here because I believe that we will have time for some questions from the audience as well, and I'm of course at disposal for any further interventions that might be needed from my side.
Thank you so much, Stefan. I have asked our audience to post any questions they may have or flag them. And in the meantime, as we are approaching our allocated time for this webinar, let me pose one question and ask for brief responses, again, going from Bojana to Jelena, Odeta, and Stefan. And my question is, first of all, when we talk about regional security cooperation, there is always this discussion. Is it something the political level or political elite want, but the policy level, the institutional, the civil servants are more of a challenge in that cooperation, or the other way around? In other words, is it more about the politics about regional security cooperation or the technocracy that is a challenge to move forward regional security cooperation? And if it was one thing that you would suggest we need to do now to enhance or advance regional security cooperation, what would that be? So starting with Bojana, I don't know if it was clear. Yeah, okay.
Well. Yes, thank you, Danny. Of course, both elements are very important. We've seen throughout these interventions some of the pitfalls, and some of them were actually mentioned as lack of resources and capacities and know-how, etc. So even in cases where we do have a political will to cooperate, and these are most of the cases when we have an external, such as the EU or international actor that is in the lead, because again, it was demonstrated today that then the Western Balkan partners are more willing to cooperate. So even in these cases, sometimes the technicalities are impeding the success of the process. And this is particularly relevant in migration and border management, where it has been proven that the lack of sometimes technology, but sometimes also capacities of the staff or lack of personnel is actually impeding the progress. So this is the first thing. And the second thing, it depends. The willingness of political elites to cooperate on security matters is different depending on what we are talking about, right? So there are certain domains where the cooperation has been quite successful, but when it comes, for instance, on cooperation on things addressing some of the bilateral issues or addressing the for instance, missing persons or some things that have not been resolved in the past, then we see that these very much politically sensitive issues are also not very much brought to the public, and the political leaders are reluctant to deal with them. So again, it really depends, and I do think that the political leaders and the governments are very cautious in how they approach the security. But again, if the pressure is imposed from the outside, then we have a higher likelihood that the cooperation will work, as we've seen in cases with Europol, Interpol, and other international, but also EU agencies. The second question, very shortly, we should stop thinking about security as a separate element in our countries in the region going forward, because it really is very much connected with the democratic consolidation. It's very much connected with the trust, not only a trust between the governments, but also trust vis-a-vis citizens and the institutions. So we should start addressing security as much as we are insisting on other elements while the countries are going forward. That's all.
Thank you, Bojana. Jelena?
Thank you, Danny. I think it's kind of Bojana addressed the part of what I would have said, but I would like to highlight that it's kind of when there's a will, there's a way. So I think that it's more at the political challenges to meaningful security cooperation at the regional level are more in the domain of the political than actually in the domain of the technocratic. Because also, if you think about the shortcomings that Bojana has mentioned in terms of border management, in terms of organized crimes, etc., that's what the EU's funds are for capacity building, right? So this is where countries can establish meaningful collaboration despite the actual shortcomings of their systems. Now, if you're asking me what to do now, I would completely shift the lens. I would, as I was saying, there are different mechanisms of collaboration that are in place, and they are in a way working across different lines, and they should be strengthened. But as an additional thing, I think there should be a substantive investment in human security as a sort of, if you wish, a soft security cooperation. There should be an investment in CSO initiatives in empowering citizens, because unless you create, let's say, societies with citizens who are aware, who hold their politicians accountable, who are not susceptible to foreign interference and malign influence, then there's security risks can also get much higher unless you address this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Jelena. And in interest of timing, I will read one question we got from Patricia da Silva Raposo. So perhaps Odeta and Stefan can also reflect on this as they're answering, and coming back to Bojana and Jelena. So it says, there was some recent news about a military alliance involving Croatia, Albania, and Kosovo. We discussed this, with rumors on the possibility of Bulgaria joining it. However, I have seen some news where this was denied. Could such return of alliances mean that there is a hardening of relations, or how does such alliance fit with the current climate in your point of view? I think we touched a bit about this on your remarks, but perhaps you can also reflect on the question from Patricia. Yeah.
If I may start, in fact, from this last question, Dani, as it's coming from the audience. No, I would say maybe the word alliance is misplaced, because this was a joint statement on cooperation between ministers of defense of 3 countries. Now, I think I touched upon that, and I also argued that it depends how we are framing and how relevant these initiatives become in the current context of geopolitical competition. Because if you look at Albania's, which I know, I think I know this case a bit better than the others. If you look at strategic partnerships Albania have has with a number of countries, including Italy, including United States, including Turkey and other countries. Cooperation in defense and security is a fundamental pillar, is a main thematic pillar of these strategic partnerships, and of course, including Kosovo. So if you look at that, this is not quite unheard of or so relevant as we are making out of it. But I think it's the geopolitical context which sort of makes it more, I think, important than what it actually may be, you know. And I think this is important also for us, from our perspective, to see things in context of what they are, and not more than that. The second, in response to your question, is it technocratic or political? Now, what I see in many of the areas of security cooperation, we see that, as Bojana and Jelena were saying, yes, at the institutional, you have quite good and positive cooperation happening in many sectors. And really, we see that there are benefits that, you know, the countries can reap and have been reaping out of this cooperation at the technical bureaucratic level. But this cooperation is out of political radar or leadership radar. And as long as it is out of political radar, it's neither communicated nor, how to say, contributing to more trust. And I think it's very important here, I echo Jelena's, that the political will here is very important. The administration works in more meaningful way, in accelerated way, and builds more meaningful cooperation when they get the message that this is in fact important at the political and leadership level. But in addition to that, I think we need a third layer or intermediary level, what may be enablers, with maybe more instruments that follow up cooperation, that follow up monitoring. We've mentioned, you already mentioned London commitment for monitoring, steering committee. You need these instruments at the level between the technocratic and the high leadership, somewhere at the level of ministers, somewhere at the level that can be seen and followed through. But for this, you need political will to have these enabling intermediary instruments. And in response to your second question, I think we need to do more in relation to communication, both among us, but also with the EU, more meaningful integration of the countries of the region in Stratcom, a group, in more initiatives regarding communication and addressing misinformation and malicious influence in the public sphere, in the media and so on, exactly because we need to counter narratives that are forged and are, how to say, that percolate through with the help of third powers and with the help of non-quite democratic forces in our societies, in our elites in the region. And in that respect, I think we need an antidote. Also here, I think Jelena's contribution made that point of this strictly defense discourse that we have in EU at the moment, you know, that we need really to boost up our defense capacities, capabilities, and, you know, to sort of make up for what we haven't done in the past decade. I think that is very important, but in parallel to that, we need an antidote, which includes issues of soft power, soft security, such as education, innovation, more work towards human capital, strengthening resilience of our societies in the region.
Stefania.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief regarding the policy versus politics question, and putting it into the context of malign influences. It's 110% politics question, without any hesitation to answer in that manner. But having in mind all of the other relevant aspects that we are discussing, it seems that it is much easier when the big guys, and unfortunately mostly those are guys still, agree on something to move forward with. And I'll stop there. But regarding the second question, regarding the alliances, I would actually like to answering by potentially opening a topic of discussion for another time. And that is that we have been hearing for years about the terms like multipolar world, fragmented powers, rise of certain breaches between a transatlantic community, and I think that we are seeing that being manifested right now, even on the lower levels and lower scales. I think that we will hear more and more about the questions of strategic autonomy. I think that we will hear more and more about the role of regional powers in multipolar world and multipolar order, and the coalitions and partnerships that we are witnessing now being established, like in very beginning of that, might become more and more relevant with the further deterioration of established coalitions, unfortunately led by the members of that coalition themselves at the existing moment. And when it comes to the security challenges, the ones coming from within what we believe were stable and long-term established security or defense coalitions might become even more relevant down the road in the not so distant future from today. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Stefan. I think my internet is becoming a bit weaker. I don't know if you still are hearing me. I hope so, yeah. Are you still hearing me? Yeah. Sorry,
Yes.
okay. My internet was okay. Let us conclude with what Sokod is asking. The EU is strengthening defense capacities, but it is unclear how these strategic actions are interacting with the security landscape of Western Balkans 6. Do you think that there are any considerations given to the Western Balkans 6 in the context of these plans in the EU? And are there other specific areas of cooperation being explored in this regard? So I guess anyone wants to take this and perhaps move us to a conclusion? We are 2 minutes away. Bojana, Jelena, do you want to take on this? Okay.
I can just shortly say that I believe it refers to a recent initiative by the European Commission and white paper on defense. There is an Western Balkans have been mentioned as like-minded partners, so there is this window of opportunity in terms of joint procurement and with the EU member states. It's also clearly stated that for now, countries who have signed security and defense partnerships with the EU will have an advantage, and for the moment, this is Albania and North Macedonia. They've signed it in November 2024, and there is now a potential agreement with other countries such as the UK, for instance. So there is the point of entry. But in the meantime, there are a lot of strategic capabilities and enablers that are inscribed in the white paper on defense, and that there are a few entry points for the Western Balkans, particularly in small arms, ammunition and explosive production, of course, increase of the defense, more contributions to the peacekeeping missions, not only in the Western Balkans, but also globally. We've seen that some of the Western Balkan partners are already doing that. And also there is an important question of strategic facilitation and the strategic mobility. That is also one of the questions. And here Albania, for instance, is a good case of point. There is ongoing process of building Porto Romano. There is already a NATO base there. So these are all the elements that the Western Balkans can pick up on. Thank you. That's for now.
Thanks, Bojana. Jelena, do you want to add anything? Yeah.
I think this was quite comprehensive, but I would just like to connect perhaps what Bojana has just said about the different entry points which the Western Balkan 6 actually have, and link it to something that Odeta has mentioned before in relation to the growth plan. I think that initiative actually needs to come from below. So there are these entry points, but it's up to the Western Balkan states to make the best out of them. So I think that this is seen, I hope that this will be seen as an opportunity by the region's leadership to actually make the best out of this and thus push the European integration process as a whole forward through this. Thank you.
Thanks, Jelena. Odeta, anything you want to add, and Stefan, to this conversation?
Maybe just one sentence.
Yeah.
There is an opportunity for the Western Balkans to discuss this and to discuss this with the EU and European partners at the European Political Community Summit in May. And I think that will be part of the discussions at the table, with Albania taking the leadership of those discussions. So I think that's very important to echo Jelena and for the initiatives to come indeed from the region, and for those countries which are better placed and already more embedded in European security mechanisms, and again having signed the European partnership on defense, then to take the lead, but also to bring the other countries on fold. Thank you.
And maybe Albania can start a good tradition like this Berlin process, to have some kind of civil society side event at the Political Community Forum, potentially. I mean, I know it's short time, but
I understand there is
Albania?
some preparation in that direction, but I am not able to disclose more at this point. I understand there might be a positive signal in that direction.
Nice.
Thank you, Dani.
Thank you, Deda. Druže, do you want to add anything at the end?
No need to add
Thank
after these phenomenal interventions.
Thank you so much, Claude, Bojana, Jelena, Odeta, and Stefan for this fantastic conversation. I hope people following the webinar had the same impression as I did, that there was real clear security, in a way, policy discussion. And I hope we can take something away from this conversation, how we can move forward the region. I think one area we can say is that civil society is positioned very well to provide that medium ground right now, as we have the issues of trust and sometimes maybe will. And it's a challenge we are going to take in the next step, hopefully together with OSF and people around in this digital meeting. I want to thank you all and wish you a fantastic weekend, and hope to see you again in these meetings. Thank you all. Thank you, Natasha. See you. Bye.
Bye.